This is part 2 of my short story, The Duelist. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, it's linked below. Definitely check that out first. And if you like my work, make sure you like, subscribe, and go over to my website, www.andywritestories.com, to check out more of my work. And now, here's part 2 of The Duelist.
Chapter 11. Down the Rabbit Hole. They aren't real, Andrew said, holding up a small remote. He pressed the button. Reggie, John, and his daughter froze. No blinking, no breathing. The unmovingness was unnerving. Even the air felt as if it had gone static. "What is this?" Oliver asked. He held his hands outward as if that would protect him from whatever attack came next. "I don't understand." "Remember the man you fought in the alley? You broke his nose, and beneath the skin there wasn't much bone or flesh but metal. Well, technically, it was a tungsten alloy that's virtually unbreakable, but that's besides the point. These androids are mine. I created them, almost indistinguishable from the real thing." "The girl isn't real, her finger was fake," Andrew remarked. He walked over to the little girl, her face frozen in time, and wrapped his fingers against her head. An unnatural knock sounded off. An expensive fake. You wouldn't have been able to tell the difference without special equipment. This was all an act, a test. What about Rose? There was a small flame inside Oliver now. It had sparked back to life when he learned Rose was alive. If Andrew had made that up too, the flame would be quelled, and that would be the end of him. "What I told you about Rose was real. She's alive and well. And before you ask the question, I did not have anything to do with the accident. That, unfortunately, was the hand the universe dealt you." Jennifer returned with another serving of tea. She set it aside and began sweeping up the broken china Oliver had dropped. "Is she real?" Oliver asked. "I'm as real as it gets." She rose and went back into the house, apparently uninterested in these fantastic events. "This can't be happening," Oliver thought. "I'm in a dream." "I know it's a shock," Andrew said calmly, "but I controlled the narrative to test you. A long time ago, you did a horrible thing hitting that girl and running away. But she's alive, so you can drop your guilt. I staged what came next using my technology to give you a chance to redeem yourself, to save a girl instead of hurting one. And you didn't disappoint. If you had walked into that house and ripped that girl to pieces, I would have lost two things: a very expensive android, and the most promising duelist I'd come across in a long time. If you killed her, I would have let Reggie pay you off and forgotten all about you. But you didn't. You saved her." "In the alley?" Oliver asked. "How did that fit into your master plan?" "I knew I was going to bring you in before that night. You were never meant to defeat one of my androids. It's impossible. There was a moment where you could have run, saved yourself, and left the girl. But you stayed. You fought, certain you couldn't win. I already knew your story. I helped write some of it. But I needed to hear it from you. I needed to see that there was still a spark inside of you, fighting for something good and right." Jennifer returned. This time, there was no tea. She was holding a silver box the size of a typewriter. "Call me old-fashioned, but my duelist, my champion, needs to be flawed. He can't just fight battles for me. The best warrior makes it personal and fights with raw emotion. The strongest emotional drive there is, Oliver, is the drive to redeem oneself. As my duelist, you'll have the opportunity to change the course of history and remake yourself. That is, unless you wish to live out your days ashamed, drunk, and working at fast food restaurants." Oliver took the metal box. He felt the weight in his hands, ran his fingers over the sharp edges. There was an inscription on the lid. "Destiny is that which we are drawn toward, and fate is that which we run into. Wyatt Earp." The lid opened with ease. It was lined with red velvet, and resting inside was an old flintlock pistol and a tiny round bullet. Oliver set the box down and lifted the pistol. The wooden grip nestled perfectly in the palm of his hand. "That night when you tried to kill yourself, that gun jammed for a reason. You were right. The universe isn't done with you yet. It needed you to live, so you could find redemption and become my duelist." Chapter 12. Origins. Andrew and Oliver were seated inside on two tall, wing-backed sofa chairs facing the fireplace. The flames threw shadows up and down the walls. The wood crackled and popped as the occasional ember escaped, only to flicker out moments later. Jennifer brought more tea. "No offense," Oliver said, "but you haven't brought us anything to drink other than tea for hours. Do you have anything a little harder? Maybe some whiskey. I've had a long day." "We have whiskey," Andrew answered for her, "but you can't have any. If you accept my offer to be my duelist, then there are certain conditions you must abide by. You can't drink anymore, and you have to leave your old life completely behind. Drinking was what kept Oliver sane over the past several years. It was the only thing which kept those terrible memories at bay. Funny how a poison could keep you alive while slowly tearing you down. Rose is alive, Oliver thought. Will that dull the pain? Will I still be driven to drink? The only thing there is to leave behind is my illustrious career as a fast food employee, Oliver said. But I'm not all that interested in dying either. Everyone will risk dying for the right price. And what price is that? $1.5 million a year. All under the table, of course. You'll live in luxury in the Cayman Islands, and your every want and desire will be provided for. I only request that when I call, you answer, and promptly win a duel for me, so I can exert my influence. Oliver set the silver box down on the floor. He examined the pistol in his hands. The gun was made of rose-colored wood and was about 1 foot long. Silver swirls spider-webbed the length of the barrel. On the butt of the gun, a metal lion's head bulged. The Wyatt Earp quote on the box is a nice touch, Oliver said. But he never fired one of these. No, he didn't. What you're holding is a flintlock pistol. It predated Mr. Earp by about 100 years. I just like the quote. You have to manually load the gunpowder and bullet, giving you one shot. The lion's head on the bottom could be used as a blunt instrument to attack your opponent after firing. Charming. How old is this thing? It looks original. It is. In fact, there's something very special about that particular flintlock dueling pistol. Aaron Burr used it to kill Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton? As in one of the guys who wrote the Declaration of Independence? The very one. You're telling me that the gun I'm holding killed one of the founding fathers of our country? That's what I'm telling you. Oliver pulled the hammer back and pulled the trigger. There was a dull click. Does it work? Loaded with gunpowder and a bullet, it still puts holes in things. Where did you get this? The story of where I got it from isn't all that interesting compared to how Hamilton died. Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton were both politicians, statesmen who shaped the origins of this country. Burr was vice president to Thomas Jefferson and was intending on running for governor of New York. Hamilton was vehemently opposed to Burr and smeared him in the public eye, which eventually led to Burr challenging him to a duel. Hamilton missed. Burr didn't. Hamilton died the next morning. Burr was charged with manslaughter, but the charges were eventually dropped. So you want me to duel other people, like Burr and Hamilton? Yes. Why? Is this some kind of sick betting match only trillionaires know about? Single combat has been the traditional way of settling disputes between gentlemen and nations since modern man has walked the earth. In ancient times, Roman generals would make an agreement with an opposing force to have a champion from each side fight to determine the outcome of a battle, saving hundreds if not thousands of lives. Countless wars and battles have been fought, but you'd be surprised how many historical victories were determined by two men locked together in mortal combat. The Prophet Muhammad waged a holy war in the year 600 BC. He had a champion, a man the ancient world came to know as the Naked Warrior. He was a corrupt tax collector, but Muhammad enlightened him, and he became one of the scariest fighters in history. He challenged Roman champions wearing nothing but pants and wielding a sword. Countless enemies fell by his hand, and his lack of armor earned him the infamous nickname. No doubt you've heard of John Smith. Disney made a cartoon out of him, and in school they taught you that he married Pocahontas. In reality, he was a much more vicious man. Early in life, John was a mercenary. He was involved in several conflicts between England and the Turkish military, which were settled by duels. John defeated and beheaded 3 Turkish champions, which earned him a knighthood. Japanese lore is filled with stories of clans settling long-time disputes through romantic sword fights in the moonlight. Military and political leaders aren't stupid. War is a waste of life and resources. It's very expensive, and oftentimes a victory comes at such a great cost that it could hardly be considered a victory at all. So single combat, duels, champions against champions became a way to respectfully settle things. The tradition carried forward throughout modern history. The world thinks we won the Revolutionary War and declared our independence from Great Britain. The war did happen. Many died, but the Crown was burning cash waging a war across the ocean. The Americans are running out of men to fight with, but they were set on dying or winning. Surrender was not an option. The Americans knew they could not win the war, but they also knew Great Britain wanted to stop fighting. The Founding Fathers made a secret pact with the Crown to settle things over a duel. George Washington met the British champion in an open field in Virginia. Shots were fired. Washington walked away unscathed, and the British duelist took a bullet in the shoulder. The war was over. Colonial society was flipped upside down when Alexander Hamilton was killed in a duel by Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States. High society couldn't conduct private affairs if public figures were being killed off, so a system was designed and rules were established. Elite members of American society selected duelists to settle disagreements for them. This system prevented unfair advantages, loss of life, and throughout America, it was how history was shaped. The Civil War was eventually settled by two men in the tradition of a duel. Pearl Harbor wasn't the catalyst that catapulted the United States into World War II. A duel was lost, and it was decided by a war profiteer that Japan should bomb the United States. The war profiteer became the richest man in the world and held the title for decades. You'll sleep better at night knowing that particular trillionaire and his duelist are dead. World War II was the war to end all wars. The United Nations was born to prevent such horrible events from ever occurring again. But we knew there was no political solution that would contain the chaos of humanity. So a secret fraternity was formed after the war. You've heard rumors of us, but they missed the mark. We've been called Freemasons, the Illuminati, but we aren't any of those things. We call ourselves the Controllers. There are currently 12 members, and there is only one criteria for membership. You have to be a trillionaire. The Controllers don't influence or pay attention to the tiny going-ons of the everyday activities of human life. We work in broad strokes and nudge global trends how we see fit. We're located in every corner of the globe, and when a disagreement arises amongst our ranks, it is settled the old way, with a duel. It's barbaric, I know, but it's also simple and elegant. Adherence to the rules of dueling will prevent any future wars from breaking out, and the greatest minds the world has ever known make all the big decisions. I don't believe any of this, Oliver shook his head. The world would know if someone grew their net worth into the trillions. It would never be feasible for you to keep your identities totally secret. And how could this organization have more power than the world's governments and the UN? Because becoming a trillionaire in secret is the only way it has ever been done, Andrew said. Amassing millions and then billions draws a lot of public attention. Fame is right around the corner, and when you approach that billionaire mark, your assets tend to stagnate around 80 billion. Unlocking trillions has to be done so rapidly and on such a broad scale through thousands of income streams that they could never be traced back to one person. About half our members emerged after the year 2000 when the internet made global connection possible, and the other half are either founding members nearing the end of their lives or have inherited their seats from their fathers. I earned my seat, and don't be naive. Do you really think the world's governments have power? They only do what wealthy people tell them to do. The Controllers have no problem starting or stopping wars or manipulating economic trends. Andrew rose from his chair. I want you to be my duelist. Is it dangerous? Yes. Could you die and possibly kill others? Without a doubt. But you can help me shape the world, and you'll be handsomely rewarded for your efforts. No one will know what you are doing to alter world events, but you will, and something tells me that will be enough. I'm offering you atonement. Put your life on the line for something greater than yourself, and become a champion. Oliver stood to meet him, the silver inlay on the pistol burning bright in the orange firelight. He thought back to that dreadful night when he tried to kill himself. The pistol he was holding now bore no resemblance to the Glock that misfired. This weapon felt supernatural, charged with purpose. The girl was alive, living a normal, happy life. Wasn't that enough to free him from his demons? I still ran, he thought. I left her in the street to bleed out, a child. I'm not a good man, Oliver said. I know, but you could be. You're my phoenix, a knight rising from the ashes to redeem himself. Be my duelist, unless you'd rather pursue your career as a drunk fast food employee. Andrew extended his hand. The fire burned bright behind them, casting two shadows across the floor. Oliver took Andrew's hand. Big doors swing on small hinges. Chapter 13. Mission Statement. The blinds cut the sunlight into thin strips over Oliver's face. The room was modest for being inside the mansion of a trillionaire. Wood floors, a large mirror on the wall, a queen-size bed, a small dresser, and a nondescript bathroom. He sat up and examined his hands. Small scabs had formed over his knuckles where he punched the metal frame of the robot in that alley. The knuckles popped as he opened and closed his fist. The cartilage was beat to hell from taking so much punishment in underground fights. There wasn't much pain now, but Oliver suspected that with age, the dull ache would grow into an arthritic creak. The door opened, and Jennifer stepped in. She was carrying a white suit and a pair of black boots. Are you rested? She asked. Oliver sat up on the edge of the bed and nodded. You'll find a shaving kit and toiletries in the bathroom. After you've washed up, put this on and come downstairs." "I can't tell if you are real," Oliver said. "What makes you think I'm not?" She stood perfectly upright, like a thin line drawn by a skilled architect. Nails manicured, straight teeth, golden movie star hair. Jennifer was so beautiful it had to be designed. She was flawless and American-made. "Because you haven't introduced yourself properly," Oliver said. "I picked up your name from Andrew talking to you, but I haven't caught your last name. Real girls have last names, Jennifer." No emotion and expressionless, she laid the white suit down on the dresser and turned to leave. As she closed the door, she paused, looked over her shoulder, and cracked a smile. "My name is Jennifer Castle." "Is there a Mr. Castle?" "No, there isn't. And to make it crystal clear for you, I'd never date a duelist." "Why?" "The life expectancy is too short. Mr. Dickens is waiting for you downstairs." Oliver gazed into the mirror. Clean-shaven, his dirty blonde hair groomed, and the white three-piece suit fit like a glove. A blood-red handkerchief bloomed in his breast pocket. "I look like something out of a Tarantino movie," he thought. He made his way downstairs. The spiraling staircase led him into the big room he'd first found himself after his encounter in the alley. Andrew was standing with his back to him, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at his garden. It was snowing. All the purples and greens from the day before had turned into an icy white. Andrew turned around. "Your only family is your mother," he said. "Yes." "You don't have much contact with her. You drop by her house for a Christmas dinner each year, but outside of that you talk very little. You'll have to stop that." "Why?" "Imagine the chaos if the world knew a group of trillionaires were making all the big decisions. When they had a disagreement, it was settled through a duel, the old-fashioned way, with flintlock pistols. You have to sever all ties with your old life. We aren't going to fake your death or do anything dramatic. You'll just vanish. After a few months, you might wind up on the missing persons list, but you'll be forgotten about. Any police organization will likely assume you decided to up and leave your not-so-fabulous life behind. I have a luxury beach house ready for you in the Caymans. Your every need will be provided for. If someone asks, you're an investment banker who has had enough of the snobs in the West. All you need to do is train like the devil, enjoy yourself, and answer the phone when I call." Andrew was calm. He was wearing a fresh black suit. The creases on his pant legs were so sharp, Oliver thought you could slice bread with them. The two men were roughly the same age, but Oliver looked 10 years older. Alcohol and bare-knuckled boxing would do that to you. Andrew, like Jennifer, looked designed, with a square jaw and perfect angles up and down his body. "She's my mother," Oliver said. "I can't just leave her behind." Andrew sighed. "You can send her money if you like, and one letter. I'm not a barbarian. After that, no contact. If you live long enough to retire, you can take all your money and do what you want with your life. But until then, no family, no marriage, no close ties. Your singular focus will be dueling. Is that clear?" "Crystal, so how much are you going to pay me?" $1.5 million a year. Oliver's stomach did a barrel roll. College dropout, drunkard, bare-knuckle boxer to millionaire overnight. Not bad. "Now, I have to be going," Andrew said. "You won't see me for a while. Jennifer will show you out and answer any more questions you might have. Think of her as your handler." "Where are you going?" "Dubai, London, Japan, Australia, and then back to the Big Apple. The work takes me everywhere." "And what work is that?" "Mostly fossil fuels and experimental technology. Nothing you need to bother yourself with. I'm afraid we won't be seeing much of one another." Andrew held out his hand. Oliver took it. "So that's it then?" Oliver asked. "A handshake and I'm on my way?" "Oh, there is much more. Even the most exhilarating chapters come to a close. You are remaking yourself. This is the start of something great." Jennifer led him into the back of a black SUV. The windows were tinted and a slender man was sitting in the driver's seat. "I'm assuming he isn't real?" Oliver pointed to the driver, another one of Andrew's robots. Jennifer nodded. "Take us to the airport." The SUV drove into the whitewash of the snowstorm swirling outside. "Can we stop by my apartment? It's not far from the airport and I haven't packed anything." "No, you can't take anything with you. Mr. Dickens has seen to it that you will have all that you need." Oliver watched the crystal snow bounce off the glass of his window. He was headed to the Cayman Islands in a three-piece suit that probably cost more than everything in his entire apartment combined. He spent his life running away from past mistakes which haunted him at every turn. It was liberating to leave it all behind, to charge towards his destiny, with nothing but the clothes on his back. Andrew had selected him because he was flawed, and believed redemption would drive him to win duels. His knowledge of firearms was limited to the BB gun he shot as a kid, but Andrew was right about one thing. Oliver wanted to become someone different. I'm stepping into a tunnel, he thought. When I come out the other side, who will I be? An hour later, they were dropped off on the tarmac and boarded a private jet. Jennifer took a seat across from him. A waiter in a red vest brought them drinks. Iced tea for the lady and a glass of water for the featured duelist. His gut cried out for alcohol, but once the engines roared to life and they broke through the cloud cover, he forgot all about it. Jennifer spoke. When we land, I'll take you to your quarters, but rest as much as you can. Tomorrow you start your training. In a month you'll be ready to duel and could be called upon at any moment. These duels, they resolve disagreements amongst the controllers. What sort of disagreements do they have? Will I know what I'm fighting for? No. The rules of dueling prohibit you from knowing. It could color the outcome. If a duelist disagrees with the argument, he could lose on purpose. But Mr. Dickens asked me to give this to you. She handed him a stack of paper. What's this? A letter. Dear Oliver, if you are reading this, then you've accepted my offer and you are now on your way to the Caymans. The life of a duelist is not an easy one. Being under the umbrella of my wealth will offer many pleasures, but you'll never find relaxation, for action will always be a phone call away. As Jennifer has likely already explained to you, you can't know the intimate details of the disagreements you'll settle for me, but I can give you the broad strokes of what I'm trying to do. You are part of something bigger than yourself now. Your regrets and darkened past will become raw material, tools to strengthen your resolve in the face of adversity, and to strike down our enemies. I need the deeper purpose that burns within you, a purpose which I feel aligns with my own. The world is an ugly place wrought with war, drugs, crime, and human rights violations. With the click of a button, mankind could be eradicated from the face of the earth. The controllers know that any madman with a nuclear bomb could spark World War III. And even with all our combined wealth and power, guiding humanity through a nuclear fallout would be difficult, if not impossible. Some of us want to see mankind find its own way, only gently steering here and there, while other controllers want to topple governments in the night and remove the nuclear threat from Earth. The problem is, the nuclear threat will never be totally eradicated. Even if the controllers took drastic action, overturned governments, and seized all weapons of mass destruction, the minds and technologies which built these weapons would still be accessible. With the right raw materials and blueprints, building weapons of mass destruction isn't all that difficult. Removing weapons will never bring peace. People just build new ones. A vehicle is needed to keep war in check. That vehicle is oil. I've seen every square inch of this planet, rubbed elbows with the worst and best humanity has to offer. Few men understand the inner workings of the planet like I do. There's a reason Rockefeller acquired so much wealth as an oil tycoon. The world moves on oil. If I could gain complete control of the world's oil markets, then I could direct the flow of planetary production. No country or organization or extremist group could launch missiles, satellites, without my influence. Instead of trying to constantly gain the upper hand, I'd be able to guide mass populations towards new heights. And they would have to listen, for without oil, human infrastructure would collapse. Contrary to what technology giants might want you to think, fossil fuels will continue to power the world for the next century. The majority of our duels will help me gain more and more control of the oil on this planet. Of course, winning duels isn't the only method I have of gaining more influence, but make no mistake, Oliver, you have a big role to play. Help me shape the world, and in turn, reshape yourself. Your friend, Andrew Dickens. The plane touched down 7 hours later. The warm tropical night was a drastic change from the snowy cityscape of New York. Oliver's new home was a 2-story beachfront house overlooking the ocean. Jennifer slid the keys into the door and showed him inside. It was breathtaking. Andrew had spared no expense. Everything sparkled with luxury. The master bedroom is upstairs, Jennifer said. You'll find the closet full of clothes your size, and a few sets of white suits identical to the one you are wearing. That is your uniform. You will wear it to every duel. She handed him an envelope. He tore it open and a wallet fell out. Inside was an ID and 2 credit cards. His picture was on the ID, but the name was different. Kyle Trench? Your alias. Kyle Trench. American investment banker. Comes to hide from the world in the Cayman Islands. Get some rest. Tomorrow you meet the gamekeeper, and your training starts. Who's the gamekeeper? You'll find out soon enough. Chapter 14. Rules of Engagement. When Oliver came downstairs the next morning, a large man was sitting in his living room drinking coffee. He was black, bald, in a dark blue suit, stretched around his muscular frame. "Hello, Oliver. I'm the gamekeeper." The gamekeeper apparently had a key to his house. He wondered who else might have a key. Jennifer surely did. "If you could get dressed, your training starts today." Oliver was expecting another dark SUV outside, but the gamekeeper traveled with style. They climbed into a purple Lamborghini. The gamekeeper ripped through the island, swerving around traffic as if speed limits didn't apply to him. Oliver supposed that they didn't. Everything in this world seemed to operate on its own set of rules. Oliver eyed the gamekeeper. His skin was moist with beads of sweat as the tropical sun beat down on them. The muscles around his jaw clenched as he grinned and blew through a red light. "Are you a robot?" Oliver asked. The gamekeeper hit the brakes and turned to him. "Excuse me?" "You know, a robot, like the Terminator." The gamekeeper's brow furrowed as he squinted his eyes. He said nothing. Cars whizzed by them laying on their horns. The gamekeeper didn't seem to care that they were dead stopped in an intersection. Oliver chuckled awkwardly and spoke with his best Arnold impression. "I'll be back." "Is that some kind of racial joke?" the gamekeeper asked. "It's just that... Never mind, let's keep driving. I'm going to pretend that you didn't ask me that question." The purple Lambo streaked down the highway. "Okay then," Oliver thought. "He's not a robot." They pulled up to a large domed structure along the water. The infinite blue sky stretched beyond over the ocean, and White Pebble Beach gave way behind it. It looked like an airplane hangar, only there was no tarmac. "Follow me," said the gamekeeper. As they approached, the big doors of the hangar rolled open. Oliver followed him inside, and the doors closed behind them. Overhead, lights flickered on. The hangar was vast, but there wasn't much inside. In the center, there was a table with a dozen flintlock pistols laid out. 50 yards from the table, there were targets and dummies. They were riddled with bullet holes. "You will meet me here every day at 9 a.m. You will be dressed in uniform. Your formal training will last 30 days. After that, I'll be leaving you, and the facility is yours. I suggest you use it liberally." Oliver walked over to one of the dummies and stuck his finger in the bullet hole. He'd never been shot before. "Do people die in these duels?" he asked. The snap of a gunshot sounded off behind him. A bullet whizzed by his ear and lodged itself deep in the dummy before him. Oliver spun around. The gamekeeper was standing near the table, a smoking pistol in his hand. "Two people firing guns at one another," he said. "What do you think?" The rules of dueling were simple. A phone call or text alerted you to a duel. Duels were always held in random remote locations. Date, time, and location were provided. The house always provided the weapons to ensure no unfair advantages or modifications were made. Duelists were to arrive 24 hours ahead of time so everyone got the same amount of meals, rest, and preparation. Every effort was made to ensure neither side had an unfair advantage. The gamekeeper would bring the pistols, preloaded with a rounded bullet. Each duelist would take one and place their backs against one another. On the gamekeeper's mark, each duelist would take 20 paces in the opposite direction. When 20 paces were reached, the gamekeeper would take his pistol and fire a single shot into the air, signaling for the duelist to fire. The duelist would each turn and take a single shot. You didn't have to kill your opponent to win, only hit them. If both duelists were hit, then hand-to-hand combat would commence, unless one of the combatants were incapacitated by their wound. The duelists fought to submission, not death. "What if both duelists miss?" Oliver asked. "The house rules dictate that hand-to-hand combat would then take place until one combatant submits. But in all my years as gamekeeper, that has never happened. I personally trained each duelist, and one of them has always hit their target." Oliver gulped. "So how often do people die doing this?" "Not as often as you think, but it does happen. Duelists are trained to win, not kill." He held up a flintlock pistol. The overhead lights shimmered in the weapon's metallic finish. "You get one shot. The gunpowder and bullet are preloaded before the fight, and you aren't allowed to pull the hammer back before marching 20 paces. Violation results in instant loss of the duel. All the pistols we use are from the late 1800s and have been perfectly preserved and passed down from the house since dueling was formalized. The barrel is 12 inches long and isn't rifled." "Rifled?" Oliver asked. "The metal inside a modern weapon is spiraled. This is called rifling. When the bullet travels down the barrel, the rifling causes the bullet to spin and improves accuracy. These pistols aren't rifled, but smooth on the inside. They fire round ball-bearing bullets. The bullets used in the duels are handmade by the house, so they're a bit more accurate than what was being shot in the 1800s. But a round bullet fired from a smooth barrel will never be as accurate as a modern pistol, and often the trajectory curves unexpectedly. Oliver picked up a gun off the table. "It's loaded?" he asked. "Yes." Oliver aimed it at the dummy across the room and pulled the hammer back. He closed one eye and stared down the gun sight. "How fast do I shoot after given the signal?" "Ideally, you shoot first and hit first, winning the duel before your opponent gets a shot off. Don't aim for the head. The head can move fast and is hard to hit. You're much more likely to land a shot on your opponent's chest. Remember, they aren't accurate weapons and bullets often curve in the air." He pulled the trigger. The hammer came down and the barrel spit the bullet out in a fireball. He hit the dummy right between the eyes. The gamekeeper grumbled. "I told you to shoot for the chest." "I was shooting for the chest." The gamekeeper took the gun from Oliver. "We have a lot of work to do," he said. Chapter 15. The Machine. Sheldon Axel grew up in Texas. His father was a rancher, and his mom ran a bakery. Like most people, they were somewhere between poor and wealthy. Sheldon was the first Axel to graduate from college, and his dad was damn proud of him. The job offers were pouring in. Sheldon was a gifted researcher, geologist, and mineralogist. His father didn't understand when he didn't take any of the jobs. "I want to stay home," Sheldon said. "I can stay in the basement. There's work I need to do here in Texas, and a job will tie me down. Give me some time. I have an idea that will change the world, and if I can gather enough evidence, finding a suitable investor to fund the project will be simple." His father rubbed his leather hands together and beat the dust out of his hat against his thigh. Understanding Sheldon was outside of his mental capacity, but he loved the boy and would do anything for him. "You have a year," he said. When Sheldon was home, he almost never left the basement, coming up to bathe once every few days, and his mother brought meals down to him. He didn't keep a schedule. He worked furiously into the night until his body collapsed and woke up naturally, only to return to the advanced mathematics that were beyond his parents' understanding. The basement was lit by dozens of lamps. Several card tables were propped open and covered with loose-leaf paper. Against the wall hung a chalkboard, streaks of white permanently ingrained from thousands of equations being scribbled out and then erased just as quickly. Jars of dirt, random parts from Radio Shack, and salvaged electronics littered the floor. The Axel Ranch was remote. The closest neighbors were 4 miles away, and Sheldon's parents figured this was for the best. If people caught wind of their son's behavior, they'd think he was loony. Most of the kids from his graduating class had gone out and accepted nice jobs, and were settling down while Sheldon tinkered away. A month later, a woman in a pinstripe suit rang their doorbell. Her black Tesla was parked on their driveway. Sheldon's father did a double take. No one ever came out here. "Is this 3402 Adeline Way?" "Yes, it is." "The Axel Ranch." "That's right. Can I help you?" Not what I was expecting. Sheldon's father was blocking her view, and she looked beyond his broad shoulders into the house. "I'm looking for Sheldon Axel." Sheldon's parents led the woman downstairs into the basement. Sheldon was waiting for them. The basement had been swept, and all the papers had been put away. There was only one card table, and there was a jar full of dirt resting on its surface. "I'm so glad you could make it," Sheldon said. "Let's get on with it." "And who are you again?" Sheldon's father asked. "I'm a representative from Archive Investments. Your son reached out to us about his work, and he's made some very bold claims, which happened to be backed up by some very interesting mathematics. He invited me here to see for myself." "And hopefully fund my research," Sheldon said. "It has to work first, Sheldon." Sheldon rubbed his hands together. "This is a jar of dirt. Nothing special about it. I dug it out of the front yard this morning, but it contains liquid gold, which can only be found using my machine." Sheldon reached below the table and pulled out a second jar. The second jar had some kind of filtration system attached to it, which took up about 2 inches of space. The two jars screwed together, the one filled with dirt on the bottom and the one with the filter on top. "The world runs on fossil fuels," Sheldon said. "Oil deposits are hard to come by, and once found, millions of dollars and man-hours are spent pumping it. Our methods of finding this precious resource are incredibly taxing, and we are also slowly destroying our planet's infrastructure by extracting such large quantities of natural gases and oil deposits from deep underground pools. My machine changes all of that. You see, there are traces of oil in every grain of soil, sand, and gravel on this earth. The trouble is, getting it out. These oil traces are on a molecular level and couldn't be extracted until now." Sheldon held up a remote and pressed a few buttons. The filter on the top hummed, and a slow hissing sound filled the room. The dirt in the lower jar began to shift and dance. Black liquid began to fill up the upper jar. Moments later, it was full of oil. With the right electromagnetic wave, the raw molecular components can be extracted without damaging the key components of the dirt, leaving it virtually untouched. My machine means the end of the modern oil refinery, and the deep scars we have left in our planet can heal. With proper funding, I can build larger versions, perfect the technology, and we will be able to extract as much as we want from virtually anywhere, without any ecological backlash. Bravo, Sheldon, the woman said. His parents blinked at each other. Neither of them in their wildest dreams could imagine such an invention would be created in their basement. I can scale this technology, Sheldon beamed, but without proper funding, there isn't much more I can do. And you shall have it. The woman reached into her purse and handed him a contract. Archive Investments is prepared to invest $50 million for 51% equity of your research. You keep 49%. If we are going to front up such a large sum of money, then we need control. The contract is very generous. You'll be given a seat at the board of Archive Investments, and you'll have a voice and vote in all major decisions. You'll also be given an unquestionable veto power to stop your technology from being used in unethical ways. Pack your things. You're moving to our research facility in Los Angeles to continue your work. I don't know what to say, Sheldon said. Say yes, Sheldon. The future is waiting for you. You have 24 hours to make a decision or the contract is off the table. She handed him a card and brushed the red hair out of her eyes. Sheldon eyed the hook-shaped scar over her left eyebrow. If it makes you more comfortable, you can have a lawyer look over those papers. There isn't anything in there you won't like. But here's a lesson many people learn the hard way. You should never sign anything without an attorney reviewing it first. Just remember, 24 hours. And just as quickly as she arrived, she was done. Sheldon stood in the front door watching the dust motes from her Tesla swirl into the evening Texas sky. He looked down at the card. Rose Sinclair, MBA, MIT, CEO and founder, Archive Investments. Chapter 16, First Blood. Oliver's hands were calloused. His right thumb had grown rough around the inside from pulling the hammer back thousands of times. 20 paces, ready, aim, fire. Bullseye. The gamekeeper had left a week ago. Oliver wasn't sure where, but he knew it was far away from the Caymans. A seaplane had come by and carried him off into the sunset. He left the purple Lambo behind. A graduation present, he said. Remember, aim for the chest. The day started at 5 a.m. He ran 3 miles to the training facility every morning, slipping into the hangar before sunrise. The gamekeeper left with a dietary program to keep him lean and a workout routine which took until noon to complete. After lunch, Oliver shot bullets. He knew he wouldn't ever be loading his own weapon. The house rules dictated that weapons be provided to the duelists, so he could never bring his own toys. But that didn't keep Oliver from enjoying the ceremony of loading a flintlock. Oliver stood over the table in the middle of the hangar and eyed the 12 resting flintlock pistols. Over the past month, Oliver must have fired over 10,000 rounds. The dummies in the far end of the hangar were coming to pieces, with missing limbs and stuffing strewn about. He picked up the first pistol, and half-cocked the hammer and poured gunpowder into its barrel. The lead ball felt heavy in his hand, and he pictured it zipping through the air, landing home deep in the body of his opponent. He wrapped the bullet in cloth, scooped up the ramrod, and shoved it down the barrel on top of the gunpowder. Next, he poured a small amount of gunpowder into the pan, the small opening under the hammer, and closed it. The grooves of his worn thumb scraped against the back of the hammer as he pulled it all the way back. He pulled the trigger. The hammer sparked against the flint, igniting the gunpowder within, and the small explosion sent the lead ball bearing sailing. The dummy's chest exploded. I've become a professional killer, he thought. But according to everything he'd been told, that wasn't entirely true. Duelists were trained to win, not kill. Did that mean his opponents would be merciful? Shooting him in the chest instead of the face? Oliver was no doctor, but he was pretty sure getting shot in the heart could still kill you. The gamekeeper had assured him that the house had a surgical team on deck to immediately treat any wounds the moment a duel was over, and their success rate of keeping duelists alive was shockingly high. His cell phone rang. It was from a blocked number, but it can only be from one person. You still haven't convinced me that you're real, Oliver said. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I've been playing you, and this is some kind of diabolical plot, Jennifer replied. Careful. You shouldn't taunt a man holding a gun. Oh, I doubt your gun is loaded. Pack your things. You're headed to Romania. Oliver looked out the window. The Caymans faded into a tiny dot in the ocean as the jet pulled away at 40,000 feet. A commercial flight required 2 stops and took a little over 24 hours of flight time to get to Romania from the Caymans. The private jet cut that time nearly in half. Only 1 touchdown in Nova Scotia to refuel, and then it was wheels up to the dueling site. Oliver opened up a Twitter feed on his cell phone and spent a couple hours browsing through articles on oil trends and global news looking for hints as to what this duel would be deciding. He wasn't an economic analyst, and he knew next to nothing about fossil fuels. There wasn't a lot of hope that he would figure it out. After all, he still knew very little about the controllers in the world of Andrew Dickens. In the end, he seemed to have gained a broader understanding of the global political scene, but he still didn't have a clue what issue he'd be fighting for in this duel. Oliver thought to himself, just win, don't die, shoot first, aim for the chest. The plane touched down at 9 p.m. An hour later, he was eating a warm meal in a small cabin outside Transylvania. The hot tea felt good against his dry throat. A fire crackled in the living room behind him. Outside in the dark woods, bright fireflies buzzed upward, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the sky. It's a full moon. The voice came from behind him. Oliver instinctively reached for the pistol in his hip, but it wasn't there. The house provided the weapons. He turned slowly. The gamekeeper was standing before him. Jesus, Oliver said. You scared the piss out of me. Let's hope not, the gamekeeper replied. He took a seat on a padded sofa chair. Any duelist trained by me should only soil himself in death. Now get me a cup of that tea you're drinking. Oliver poured him a cup and sat down across from him. Transylvania with a full moon and a starry night. Perfect evening for a duel, said the gamekeeper. Why are you here? Oliver asked. The gamekeeper's inky black skin shimmered in the firelight. The white-toothed smile was unnerving. Death is knocking at your door, Oliver. Your first duel is tomorrow. I taught you how to pull the hammer back, take aim, and fire, but I never taught you how to kill. You told me that duelists were trained to win, not kill. But in the process of winning, you will kill. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for the next handful of duels. But the time will come when you will either kill or be killed. Brushes with death are inevitable. When you kill a man, you take everything from him. Everything he was, everything he could become, everything that he may do. Whisked away with the snap of a gunshot. The gamekeeper stared into the flames. The smile was gone, replaced by the smoky flare of the fire. Killing changes the fundamental parts of a man. I'm here because I wanted to see you one last time before your duel, before you stepped into the ring of death. For after you kill, you won't be the same, and the Oliver Green I trained, the one seeking redemption, will be gone. You will be reborn. Oliver shifted in his seat. He didn't know what to think about all this. Have you ever killed anyone? Oliver asked. The gamekeeper reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 2 cigars. He handed one to Oliver. I have. And how did it change you? You'll find out soon enough. The 2 men sat in silence. Tendrils of smoke swirled from their cigars as the fire burned low. Deep in the dark wood, the howl of the coyote pierced the night. Or was it a werewolf? Oliver thought. Oliver was up before the sun. Adrenaline pumped through his veins in electrical waves. He stepped outside and there was a car waiting for him. It was black with no markings. Oliver slipped into the back and did his best to clear his mind as the driver pulled away. He thought to himself, I might kill someone today. Lightning bubbled inside his mind, and for the first time since he met Andrew Dickens and fell down this rabbit hole, the haunting images from his past floated up. Cracked windshield, broken helmet, bloody sidewalk, blonde doll. 30 minutes later, the car came to a halt. He stepped out into the dawn. He was standing in a clearing surrounded by tall trees. Greenery and life teemed in the air. Oliver looked back at the mirror black car idling behind him. In the tinted windows, he could see his white suit, black boots, and flowered jacket pocket. The gamekeeper was standing in the middle of the clearing. At the other end, another black car pulled up and a woman stepped out. She approached the gamekeeper. Oliver did the same. She was wearing a deep purple suit. Her blonde hair was done up in a bun. One of her eyes was ghost gray, and the other a sharp blue. Oliver stared into the dead eye and wondered how many duels she had lasted before having it blasted to hell. You both know the rules, the gamekeeper said. In each hand he was holding an ornate flintlock pistol. They each took one. Oliver ran his callous thumb over the hammer and hooked his finger around the trigger. 4 pounds of pressure and the bullet would fly. 20 paces in opposite directions. Don't turn around until you hear my gunshot, the gamekeeper said. At the sound of my shot, you may cock your weapon, turn and fire upon one another. Arming your weapon before my signal will result in immediate disqualification and loss. A hit means victory. If you're both hit or both miss, then you'll commence in hand-to-hand combat until submission or death settles the duel. Do you understand? Perfectly, the woman said. Oliver nodded. Mark, the gamekeeper said. He backpedaled out of the line of fire. Oliver turned and paced. The morning light was breaking through the trees. Orange beams lit the clearing. Dead leaves crunched beneath his boots. The girl was battle-hardened and tough. She was small, about 5'5" and likely fast. Oliver pictured her nimble fingers spindling their way around the hammer and trigger with ballerina-like finesse. Bang, bang, and you're dead, smoked by the one-eyed dame. Oliver stopped. They were 40 paces apart with their backs turned. His thumb rounded the hammer. A cool breeze blew through the wood, but his hands were dripping with sweat. He listened for the mark. The gamekeeper fired his weapon. The sound of the shot exploded through Oliver's body like a shockwave. In one fluid motion, he spun on his heels and pulled the hammer back on his pistol. When he came around, the woman was aiming her pistol directly at him. He hadn't even gotten his pistol up. Her speed was uncanny. There was no way he was going to get off the first shot. She fired. Oliver threw himself sideways to the ground. The hot air of the bullet streaked past him. She missed. Oliver got to his feet and steadied his pistol. The woman was still. Her blind, dead eye glared at him in defiance, daring him to pull the trigger. Andrew's words echoed in his mind. The universe isn't done with you yet. It needed you to live, so you can find redemption and become my duelist. The woman didn't raise her hands or plead. She stood there, with her chin up, waiting for the end. Oliver's heart was pounding. Was this the moment he became a killer? He didn't have to shoot her. He could fire upwards into the sky and try his luck fighting her hand to hand. The woman was half his size, but she moved like a snake. He imagined it would be like trying to punch a cracking whip, snapping and snarling and cutting at his skin. The barrel wouldn't steady. His hand was shaking. He must have fired over 10,000 shots in the hangar, but standing out here in the woods pointing a weapon at a living, breathing human had fried his nerves. I can't kill her, he thought to himself. Shooting her in the chest might be fatal. The house had state-of-the-art surgeons on deck, but Oliver couldn't imagine them keeping her from floating off to the other side if he put a bullet in her heart. A shot to the arms or legs would be predictable. At 50 yards with this old flintlock, his aim had to be perfect. He took his time, and with a steady hand squeezed the trigger. She fell to one knee and clawed at the side of her head, blood flowing down her arm. The bullet had ripped her ear clean off. Seconds later, she sprang forward and charged at Oliver. The gamekeeper stepped forward and fired a shot into the ground in front of her. She came to a halt, her mouth seething a venomous grin. It's over, he said. You lost. The house will tend to your wounds. The duel is over. We have a victor. The gamekeeper collected their guns. Oliver climbed back into the unmarked car and was taken away. 19 hours later, he was standing on the balcony of his house in the Caymans, watching the sun dip below the ocean. His first duel had come and gone. He'd won, but not because he was the better fighter. She was twice as fast as he was and beat him on the draw cleanly. If they'd been using modern, more accurate weapons, he'd be dead. Oliver was certain she was aiming dead between the eyes, but the rounded bullet had curved. She was a killer. He wondered who she was before that, and thought to himself, and who will I become when I take my first life? Chapter 17. Derailed. Oliver scooped up his alarm and threw it across the room. He finally rolled out of bed at noon. He put on a robe, a pair of plush slippers, and watched the coffee fall, drop by drop. He took it black and sank into an armchair. There would be no exercise or training today. The phone rang. Congratulations, Andrew said. You've won your first duel. What disagreement did I settle for you? Oliver thought of the woman's dead eye, the blood pouring out of her ear and streaking down her arm. Andrew was silent for a moment. Something wrong, Oliver? You sound upset. I shot a woman, a scary, deadly woman who'd beat me on the draw, but missed because of an ancient, outdated weapon. She was better than me, but I won. These damn pistols are so inaccurate. Why are we training to use them at all? It's the old way, Andrew said. The rules of dueling have been adhered to for years, and the controllers treat them like law. 20 paces and flintlock pistols overseen by the gamekeeper. It's the way it's always been, and it will always be. A gentleman's way of settling disputes. We can't have duelists hacking each other to pieces with pickaxes. But it doesn't make sense. Why not swords? Something that leans more on skill than the luck of shooting an inaccurate weapon 50 yards and hoping you don't kill each other. I don't even know what I'm fighting for. Where's the nobility in that? If you're unhappy with our arrangement, you're damn right I'm unhappy. Oliver stood up and threw his coffee cup against the wall. White specks of porcelain shattered as the cup fell and broke apart. I was supposed to redeem myself, Andrew. That little girl I hit. She lives. Why am I even redeeming myself from it if she's alive and happy? I may have amends to make. I thought dueling would give me purpose, like some kind of knighthood. But I don't even know what I'm fighting for. You're fighting for a brighter future. Andrew was calm. His voice was flat and unshaken by Oliver's outburst. There's this terrorist. They call him the Hammer. He carries a mallet on his waistband. He owns a chunk of land in the Islamic territories. His land houses an abundance of oil. His people are starving. Infectious disease is widespread. I've seen the grotesque pictures of emaciated children. His oil reserves could be traded on the fair market to bring in wealth, which would make his little corner of the world very prosperous. However, instead of selling the oil, he enslaves children to pump it out of the ground for him. He barters the oil on the black market for his own profit and has amassed a small army, which he uses to hunt down and kill American soldiers. They call him the Hammer because anytime the military gets within 2 miles of his slice of paradise, he drags an innocent person out into satellite view and beats them to death with a mallet that dangles from his waist. He's surrounded by families and children, so a drone strike is out of the question, and no one can get close. Civil war has broken out in the surrounding lands, and people are cutting each other to pieces. Some of the controllers wanted to sit back and see how the Civil War played out. Others wanted to push their political connections and force military action, despite the inevitable loss of life. I want this guy gone, and I want the leverage his oil wells will give me. But the real threat is nuclear. The Hammer has been attempting to build a nuclear missile for the past 4 years. He finally succeeded 8 days ago, and was planning on aiming it at Europe until they handed him large sums of money. Some of the controllers believed a complete hands-off approach was best. I don't. What the controllers and this terrorist didn't know was just how much oil was sitting there. The oil wells could produce enough energy to power California for 5 years. If he would have lost the duel, this man would have been allowed to move forward with his plans and threaten the world with a nuclear bomb. But you won, and things got settled my way. Turn your TV on and go to Channel 9 to see the fruits of your labor. Oliver picked up the remote and turned on the TV. A news anchor was reporting from a helicopter flying over a burning building. Oliver's heart quickened as he listened to the report. The terrorist known as the Hammer was dead. A strike team had killed him while Oliver was sleeping last night. The Hammer beat a man to death with his mallet when he discovered he was under siege. He hoped they'd back down. They didn't. It took the strike team 18 minutes to get through the defenses. He killed 3 more people with his bare hands during that time. One of them, a child. But he was dead now, and the nuclear weapon he was hiding was no longer a threat. The president came on and was shaking some military leader's hand. Oliver flicked the TV off. There was a price to stop this man and seize his assets, Andrew said. It was heavy, but it had to be paid. He won't be able to hurt anyone ever again. His assets are now under my control and can't be used to kill. Oliver could hardly speak, but he killed a child. And it wasn't the first time, Andrew said, but it was the last. This is the world we live in, Oliver. It's ugly. This is why the duelists aren't told what they're fighting for. But know this, I always act for the greater good. If I hadn't acted swiftly, pulling the strings to get a strike team in there, he may have dropped a nuclear bomb in Europe. Sometimes great sacrifice has to be made to bring about the new world. The new world, Oliver barked. There has to be another way. I can't build peace with you while children get killed for the greater good, so you can win oil. Oliver, that man could have started World War III. There was a price to stop it. You won the duel, and enabled me to make the right moves. You may bear the burden of life lost today, but when the sun shines down on a peaceful planet, know that your gun made it happen. I asked you to be my duelist because you needed to be reshaped. You were broken. I thought you had the resolve to fight for me. Most men lack the fortitude to do what is necessary for the greater good of mankind. The world can't die for the sake of one child, but one child can be sacrificed for the sake of the world. Now get some rest. I don't foresee needing your services for a couple of weeks, but don't get rusty on me. And by the way, I saw the condo your mother bought in Florida. It's very nice." Andrew hung up. The dial tone sent shivers down Oliver's spine. He'd been sending chunks of his earnings to his mother. Were Andrew's comments about her a threat? Oliver bought a bottle of whiskey and drank himself to sleep. The rules be damned. Alcohol was the only thing which could calm his mind. The next morning he woke up with a migraine which felt like a splinter in his brain. He buried the pain beneath 642 shots, firing round after round across the hangar. His mind warped the targets into the woman he'd fought. The dead eye, lightning quick draw, bloody ear blown clean off. He stared down the gun sight and aimed at the dummy's head. When the bullet struck, the head snapped off and rolled to the ground. Oliver stood over it as his mind rewound to the news anchor dully reporting the death of the innocent child at the hands of a terrorist. In America, they would never broadcast such grim news, but he was halfway across the world, fighting in a twisted rich man's game. The gamekeeper was right. The killing changed you. That child's blood is on my hands, Oliver thought. He fired a shot into the dead dummy's face. Chapter 18. Land of the Lawless. Sheldon Axel pushed up his glasses. Archive Industries had been kind to him. He was rich, and Los Angeles was a wonderland. Anything he needed to forward his research had been provided. Over the past 2 years, he'd made gigantic strides towards perfecting his work, and his crowning moment was on the horizon. Archive Industries was going to pull oil out of the sands of Manhattan Beach without leaving one shred of ecological damage. They'd have tankers full of liquid, inky gold, and after the big trucks rolled away, it would be as if they were never really there at all. Nature would be untouched. The formulas worked. The machine was nearly complete, but he hadn't been able to scale it. His best magic trick was pulling oil out of a gallon of dirt. Anything bigger, and the only thing he could pull out of the ground was water and air. Papers littered his desk. He fumbled with them looking for the answer. It was here somewhere. There would be no sleep. Rose had given him 4 weeks to solve the problems of scale. Archive Industries was pouring billions into his work, for if he could pull this off, it would be on the order of magnitude of inventing the wheel, or the discovery of fire. His penthouse overlooked the Los Angeles skyline. The window was covered in white marker. He turned his floor-to-ceiling glass windows into a blackboard, filling it with complex mathematical formulas. He looked down at the city and think about all the lives he was about to change forever. The focus of his eyes changed to read the white, scribbled formulas across the window. "I'm running out of time," he thought to himself. As Sheldon read over the markings on his window, a dark figure, hidden in the shadow, shifted in the corner of the room, waiting for his master's instructions. The only pattern that Oliver could find in the duels was that they took place in the most exotic and lawless places in the world. He'd fought amongst the war-torn forests of Uganda, pulled the trigger 3 times in Venezuela, and once in Egypt under a burning sun. In Zimbabwe, he faced a thin albino man in a black suit. The albino was too slow. Oliver put a bullet in his chest. A team of paramedics materialized from nowhere and whisked him away. Jennifer assured him the man lived. Beneath a moonlit evening in Bolivia, he took a bullet in the shoulder. 40 paces away, his opponent curled up into a ball. Oliver gripped his shoulder and watched the man bleed out. The house paramedics came to his aid, but death came for him. And someday it will come for me, Oliver thought. Oliver dueled in Ethiopia, Afghanistan. In 2 years, he'd never lost. He trained hard and immersed himself in his craft. He studied the curvature of the bullets. To the untrained gun hand, the curve seemed random, but he figured out how to control them with the snap of the wrist. He could make bullets bend to his will. Oliver Green had become the most feared duelist amongst the controllers. His victories pushed Andrew Dickens into the top spot, and he exerted his influence across the globe unchecked. But victory had taken its toll on Oliver. He'd been shot 3 times, and once engaged in hand-to-hand combat while bleeding from a bullet hole in his left thigh. The leg never felt the same again. With each trigger pulled and duel won, his dark past melted into a soft mist. He'd forgotten all about Rose Sinclair, her tricycle, and his life as an underground boxer. He'd been reborn all right, risen from the ashes as a hardened, unfeeling gunslinger. On the flights that took him across the globe to duel, he'd scour the internet for any clues as to what victories he'd won for Andrew. Outside of Oliver's first duel, the eccentric trillionaire never shared any information about what the duels were deciding. He'd read about petty wars in the Middle East beginning and ending, stock markets crashing and corporations going public. The occasional tragic death of a celebrity or industry giant. Even after all this time, Oliver couldn't connect the dots between world events and his duels. He'd met some of the same duelists again on the battlefield. They would change their strategies to try and beat him, spinning sideways to dodge his shot, or trying to beat him on the draw. But it was all for naught. Oliver always won. Fate and luck seemed to be on his side. The cool mist of the forest crept across the soft ground. Sunrise was Oliver's favorite time of day to duel. Oliver took the ornate pistol from the gamekeeper's white-gloved hand. His opponent did the same. The man nodded to Oliver and turned around, waiting for the signal to pace. "Mark," the gamekeeper said. His opponent was big, built like an offensive lineman. A thin scar drew a white line across his left cheek, a bullet streak. This wasn't his first rodeo, and that suited Oliver just fine. The gamekeeper fired a shot into the air. Oliver spun and fired. The bullet struck his opponent in the hand holding his pistol. He dropped it and fell to a knee. On the other side of the world, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. His master had given him the order. He wrapped his hands around Sheldon Axel's neck and squeezed. Sheldon fell to the ground and looked up in horror at the metal nose beneath the broken skin of his assailant. Sheldon's legs stopped kicking. The machine dropped his body and lit the room on fire and left. The next morning, Rose Sinclair stood in front of the smoldering building and wept. Chapter 19. Crash. Oliver climbed into the jet and fell into his chair. Somewhere over the Atlantic, he awoke from a nap, flipped open his laptop, and checked his newsfeed. A smoking building filled his screen. Firefighters were dousing the last few flames, and a girl with a hook-shaped scar and fireball red hair was standing next to the news anchor. Her name appeared across the banner along the bottom of the screen. Rose Sinclair, CEO of Archive Industries. "Do you think this was an accident?" the anchor asked. "No, I do not." Rose's cheeks were flush. Anger and revenge rounded her every syllable. Someone burnt this building down on purpose, and one of our most gifted scientists was killed. We were on the verge of making a breakthrough. I did my best to keep it a secret until we were ready to reveal our work to the world, but it doesn't matter now. Someone found out what we were doing and wanted to put a stop to it. "Those are some harsh accusations," the anchor said. "Any idea who might be behind this?" "No, but if they're listening, I have a message for them and the world. The research we were funding was going to change everything as we know it in the world forever. Everyone in every corner of the globe would have been given access to cheap, environmentally safe oil and fossil fuels. We were developing a new method of pulling oil out of the ground that would have created such an abundance of energy the corrupt oil barons would become obsolete. This is just a setback. Sheldon Axel was the mastermind behind this technology, and without him it will be harder to fully develop it. But mark my words, I have copies of every note, every formula he ever scribbled, and we will finish the job. The world will have cheap, unlimited resources." Oliver's phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Did Andrew have Sheldon Axel killed?" Oliver demanded. He flipped open the shield to the window and looked out over the Atlantic. The moonlight fractured over the waves 40,000 feet below. He'd buried the pain of that horrible car accident in his newfound profession, but the old wounds had just been ripped open. "I don't know who Sheldon Axel is, Oliver." "He's a scientist. I'm watching the news right now. He was developing some kind of oil technology. I won a duel yesterday, and now he's dead. Tell me Andrew did not do that. Tell me that I did not do that." "I don't know. I'm not told what the duels decide, but I can assure you that Andrew is making positive change throughout the world, and your victories are no small part of that." Oliver thought he was going to be sick. He'd taken this job, been roped into this world to make amends for what he'd done to Rose. He'd set out to become a new man, but all he managed to do was become a dealer in death. "Why are you calling?" Oliver asked. "When you land, get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow you fly out to Romania for a duel." He'd never fought duels this close together before. Usually a month would go by before Jennifer called upon him again. "I've been in the air for 8 hours, Oliver said. "And you want me to duel again tomorrow?" "Mr. Dickens needs your help." "You tell Mr. Dickens he can go to hell." Oliver hung up and spent the rest of the flight reading everything he could about Rose Sinclair and Archive Industries on the internet. Chapter 20. Guilt. When Oliver arrived home, Andrew was standing in his living room. He was wearing a blue suit, much like the one he was wearing on the day they first met. His hands were buried in his pockets. Oliver hadn't seen Andrew in 2 years. "What are you doing here now?" Oliver asked. "I've come to see an old friend." Oliver walked past him to the minibar in the corner and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. I don't give two shits about your no alcohol rules right now. Oliver unscrewed the cap and poured 2 glasses. He offered one to Andrew. They touched their glasses together. What are we toasting to? Andrew asked. My health. Oliver threw his drink back. It went down like fire. God knows I need the luck. I need you to duel for me tomorrow. You flew all the way from New York just to tell me that in person? Jennifer called me on the flight home. You could have saved yourself the trip. It's the first time I've asked you to fight duels on back-to-back days. Oliver kicked back the rest of his whiskey and walked over to Andrew. He was close enough to hit him. You're here to make sure your prized duelist isn't unwinding. That I'm still loyal, even though Rose is involved now. Andrew said nothing. Look me in the eyes and tell me you didn't have that scientist killed. Andrew again said nothing. I may be your hired smoking gun, but I'm not a slave and I'm not stupid. He was working for Rose's company, developing some kind of new oil technology. I don't know how, but somehow that was a threat to your plans. I won that duel, and now Sheldon is gone. I may as well have killed him myself. You're right, Andrew said. He threw back the rest of his drink. His voice was icy and calm, as if they were sitting on a park bench on a bright, sunny afternoon. I had him killed. He was on the brink of a major discovery that would have forced me to rethink all of my plans. His life only buys me time. Rose has considerable resources at her disposal, and there are enough pieces for archive investments to complete Sheldon's work. You are soulless, Oliver spat. You pull me into this violent world with the promise of hope and redemption, and all I've done is shoot people. I took this job to make up for my sins, to make amends for what I did to that little girl. Now my hands are dirtier than ever. Winning duels hasn't brought me any closer to a better life or a better world. You used me, and now I've attacked that girl again. And you need to duel again, Andrew said. If you win, you'll be able to stop Rose peacefully. She won't be hurt. Bullshit. I won't do your dirty work here. You don't have a choice. She's going to be taken off the board no matter what. The controllers have already decided. The manner in which we do it is entirely up to you. With Sheldon out of the way, the research has come to a dead stop. I'll be able to manipulate the financial markets and bankrupt archive industries and buy up all their research. They have considerable resources, but next to the controllers, Archive Industries is an anthill, and we are the boot. My colleagues want it to get bloody, to take her out the old-fashioned way, alone in the dark. It would be quick and painless. Your duel tomorrow determines which way this happens. Win, and you can save her life. But you'll destroy everything she's built, Oliver said. He had no glass, but the amber bottle of whiskey was within reach. He grabbed it with his trigger hand and knocked it back. When he finished, he tossed it aside. It shattered across the marble floor. If it's so damn important, you suit up in this ridiculous outfit, walk 20 paces, and squeeze that trigger. Fight your own damn battles. Andrew kept his composure. He stuffed his hands deep into his pockets and rocked back and forth on his heels. There was a terrorist, an oil baron you'd helped me eliminate by winning your first duel. He killed a child before you could get to him, Oliver hung his head. He balled his right fist, the nails biting into his palm. I don't know who that child was, but I hear screams every night when I try to go to sleep. I'll carry that burden for the rest of my life. Do you remember what I said to you then? Andrew asked. We can't sacrifice the world for one child, but one child can be sacrificed for the world. That child is Rose. She has to go. How that happens is up to you. The choice, as it has been since the beginning, is yours. If you don't want to be my duelist anymore, then pack your things. You'll get your final paycheck in 3 weeks, and you'll never hear from me again. But if you don't show up at that duel, I'll be forced to replace you with someone untrained, and God knows what will happen. Andrew turned and headed for the front door. Images pulsed in Oliver's brain as Andrew's black shoes clicked across the tile. Cracked windshield, bent bicycle tire, bloody sidewalk, blonde dolly. And now, a woman grown with a white hook scar over her eye. Oliver called out, Andrew, can I trust you? Andrew stopped and put a hand up on the doorframe to support himself. He looked up at his hand as if it were holding the universe together, and taking it down would cause the stars to fall. That is something you're going to have to decide for yourself, he said, and closed the door behind him. Chapter 21. Rematch. Jennifer had dropped him off on the tarmac. She wished him luck and handed him a bottle of Advil. He popped 2 pills, and the grip his hangover had on his brain lessened to a dull ache. He pulled all the windows in the cabin down, told the steward to bring a bottle of sparkling water and to leave him alone. 2 hours into the flight, the headaches came on like a lightning storm. The back of the bottle warned adults not to take more than 4 pills a day. Oliver gulped 4 down. That makes 6 pills, he thought. Wouldn't it be funny if the pills were what finally killed me? He found a lot online about Rose Sinclair. She graduated from MIT with shining colors, landed a job at Goldman Sachs, and played the financial markets for a few years, amassing a small fortune. She then set out on her own and founded Archive Investments. Archive Investments was a giant investment firm where millionaires and billionaires pooled their resources and invested in the stock market, new products, startups, small businesses, and patents. Rose had been wildly successful. Her firm had become a major player in tech, agriculture, and real estate. 2 years ago, she had made a major investment in Sheldon Axel's research and purchased the rights to all of his work. Archive Investments had funneled billions into his research, claiming they were on the verge of a technological breakthrough that would bring cheap and clean oil to the world whilst doing minimal environmental damage. That all came to a halt when Sheldon died in a tragic fire in his home. Oliver had won a duel the day before. Rose publicly announced what Sheldon Axel had been working on and swore to bring his tech to the world no matter what. Andrew was having Oliver duel again 48 hours later. Oliver took another pill. His liver was in hell, but he didn't care. He would need a steady hand, and the hangover needed to go. He got up and rapped on the cockpit door. The pilot opened it. "Everything all right, sir?" "Yeah, I just wanted to see the view from up here for once. There is an empty co-pilot seat. Mind if I sit here?" "Not at all." Oliver buckled in. "So you fly this bad boy all by yourself?" "That's right. Right now we're cruising on autopilot." "I'm Oliver. What's your name?" "Jack." The pilot shook Oliver's hand. "I've been flying you around for a couple of years now, and you've never bothered to come up here. Why now?" "To be honest, the thought never crossed my mind. You have kids, Jack?" "2 girls, waiting for me back home." 2 girls, Oliver thought. A home. Pilot is not a robot. The mere black SUV scooped him up. The driver turned around. "Mr. Green, I have instructions to take you directly to the dueling site." That was strange. He usually had at least an evening to rest before a fight. The controllers were in a frantic rush to settle something. But what? Oliver eyed the back of the driver's head. He wondered if he was real, or another one of Andrew's robots. Did all the controllers have access to robots? Did this driver work for Andrew or the house? "What's your name?" Oliver asked him. The driver eyed him in the rearview mirror. "I'm a little nervous," Oliver said. "I just fought a duel yesterday, and I'm not exactly jumping up and down to get shot at again so soon." The driver nodded, seeming to understand. "Name's Charles, and I don't know how you guys do what you do. No way I could kill another man." "Well, it's easy to kill the other guy when the alternative is getting killed yourself." So, Oliver thought, Charles the driver isn't a robot either. Dusk was fast approaching. The Transylvanian forest was blanketed in a soft orange. In the distance, the tall steeples of an ancient castle rose over the trees. It had been 2 years since Oliver was last here, and the ominous creak of the forest felt like a warning that he shouldn't have come. The gamekeeper was standing in the clearing, white-gloved hands holding 2 loaded flintlock pistols. On the opposite end, an SUV pulled up and a woman stepped out. Her purple suit clashed against the deep woods behind her. A dead white eye glared at Oliver. She turned so he could see the side of her face. She ran a lone finger across her deformed ear. Oliver would never forget the quick draw this woman had. It had been 2 years since they last met in this haunted forest, and she was still in the game. Oliver had trained hard and won many duels since then, but he wasn't sure if he was faster than the gun hand before him. The 2 SUVs idled as their respective duelists approached the gamekeeper. Oliver took his weapon. As the 2 fighters listened to the rules they'd heard 100 times before, the woman's dead eye peered into Oliver's soul. They turned and paced. Oliver felt icy fingers spindling on the back of his neck. His headache was creeping back, and memories of the deadly woman raced across his mind. Tiny fingers, flick of the wrist, the evil glare when she lost, mutilated ear. But most of all, the lightning-quick draw that Oliver knew he couldn't beat. When they last met, Oliver won because the universe granted him a stroke of luck. She aimed to shoot him dead right between the eyes. The gamekeeper trained the duelist to hit the chest. It was a much bigger target. That piece of advice seemed to slip this woman's mind. If the bullet hadn't curved, Oliver would be dead. Oliver prayed her bullet wouldn't curve this time. He needed her aim to be true, and the trajectory straight as an arrow. Oliver flipped his pistol upside down and gripped the barrel in his hand, the bulge of the grip dangling. The gamekeeper fired his shot, the signal for the duel to begin. The woman moved in a blur. No one on Earth could draw faster. but Oliver wasn't trying to get the first shot off. He raised the pistol upwards, barrel in hand, and held the handle upright in front of his face, right between the eyes. The woman fired. The ball bearing spiraled through the air. Oliver closed his eyes and held the pistol steady. Once again, she shot to kill. Her aim was perfect, dead between the eyes, right where Oliver was holding the metal butt of his gun. The bullet ricocheted off Oliver's gun, breaking in two. One half flew harmlessly away, and the other half of the bullet lodged deep in his arm. The shrapnel cut deep into his shoulder. He dropped his gun and fell to one knee. Oliver had lost. The woman lowered her smoking gun and nodded at him. The hatred drained from her face as if she had fulfilled a long debt. Oliver picked up his weapon. The two duelists made their way to the gamekeeper to return their weapons. His opponent's gun was empty. His was not. Two medical personnel emerged from the forest behind the gamekeeper to tend to his wounds. They were unarmed. Oliver waved his gun in the air briefly. "Mind if I take this with me? Souvenir for my first loss." "Hand it over," the gamekeeper said. "House rules. The gun gets returned." Oliver pulled the hammer back and pressed the barrel of his pistol against the gamekeeper's temple. The gamekeeper's eyes went wide. The paramedics froze. The woman with the dead eye was stunned, her pistol hanging uselessly from her hand. "What do you think you're doing?" the gamekeeper gasped. "Did you tell Mr. Dickens that I lost?" "Of course. The controllers are notified immediately." The gamekeeper turned to face Oliver. The barrel was now pointed at his face. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Oliver, but if you don't lower that pistol this instant, I will beat you to death with it. Make a move, and you die." Oliver pressed the barrel against the gamekeeper's forehead. "Now give me your sidearm." The gamekeeper handed over his pistol. It was a Colt Python with 5 bullets left in the chamber. The gamekeeper had fired one off to start the duel. Oliver raised the Colt with his good hand and backed away towards the SUV waiting for him. He climbed in and pressed the gun to the back of the driver's head. "Get me to the jet, or you get a bullet." The driver didn't move. Oliver's heart skipped a beat. Had he been wrong? If the driver was a robot, his threats would have been useless. After a moment, the driver started the car. "Just don't kill me," he said as he pulled away. They peeled onto the tarmac. Oliver readied both guns, the flintlock with 1 shot and the Colt with 5 rounds. But the tarmac was empty, and the jet was idling by. "When I get out," Oliver said, "you hit the gas and don't look back. Got it, Charles?" The driver nodded. Oliver got out of the car and ran up the stairs into the jet. The stewardess was tidying up the cabin. Oliver pointed a gun at her. She screamed. The cockpit door banged open, and out stepped Captain Jack. Oliver raised both guns, pointing one at each of them. Oliver looked at the stewardess. "Get off the plane," he said. With raised hands, she shuffled her way out the door and down the stairs. Oliver closed and locked the door behind her. "What do you want?" the captain asked. "I want you to get home to your 2 little girls unharmed. In order for you to do that, I need you to fly directly to Los Angeles. You have enough fuel to do that?" "No, we'd have to stop somewhere on the East Coast." "Then you better get us wheels up. I needed to be there yesterday." Captain Jack sat down and fired up the engine. Right again, Oliver thought to himself. Captain Jack bleeds just like the rest of us. Hang tight, Rose. I'm coming. Chapter 22. Redemption. The flight from Romania to New York took 12 hours. Oliver fought to stay awake the whole time. He couldn't pass out. The good captain would take his guns away, and it would be game over. Oliver had found the first aid kit and pulled the shrapnel out of his arm. The makeshift stitches would need to hold. He wrapped the arm with gauze and bandages. Lack of sleep coupled with the fading hangover and loss of blood were a nasty combination. His vision blurred red, and the jet's lounge seemed to tilt excessively back and forth. The gun was steady on Captain Jack. "As soon as the refuel is done, it's wheels up," he said. "You try anything and you're dead. Daddy's little girls grow up fatherless. Get me to LA and you'll never see me again. Understand?" Captain Jack didn't respond, but he seemed to get the point. There were wheels up in no time. The jet cut through the night. Oliver had lost the duel on purpose. He leaned back in his chair and thought of Andrew, standing in his doorway the night before. "Andrew, can I trust you?" "That's something you're going to have to decide for yourself." Oliver had made his choice by throwing the duel. He prayed he made the right one. Andrew may be trying to save the world, but Oliver knew a liar when he saw one. Andrew didn't want to keep Rose safe. He was on his own holy mission, and that meant burning everything down that got in his way. Even a child, if he needed to. He wasn't the same man who took him. Andrew was always powerful, but now he was at the top, king of the hill. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Throwing the duel would hold Andrew still, keep him in check until Oliver could get there to protect Rose. He had no idea what the other controllers were planning. What if I'm wrong, he thought. What if Andrew was telling the truth, and losing that duel just ended Rose's life? Well, that's why he was flying across the globe with 2 loaded guns. Sometimes the best solution was to shoot your way out. The Colt Python was a monster with 45 caliber bullets. It would blow a man's head clean off. In some ways, he lucked out. Now Oliver was armed to the teeth, but he paid a price getting out of there so fast with the weapons. Andrew had surely been informed by now what had happened. This plane had to be being tracked, and maybe there would be a small army waiting for Oliver when they landed. Oliver was in no shape to fight. His vision was getting darker with every passing minute. When they touched down, Oliver scooped up the good captain's overcoat. He buried his pistols deep in the Navy pockets and stepped off. Once again, the tarmac was empty. No one waiting for him. Where is Andrew now? Oliver thought. What's he playing at? Oliver stepped out, anticipating a rifle shot in the distance to put him down. It didn't come, and he disappeared into the night. Rose Sinclair sat alone in her living room. The coffee table was buried beneath 2 laptops, 1 iPad, countless scattered notes, and a giant mason jar with a set of filters on the bottom. The very first prototype she'd seen that fateful day 2 years ago in Texas. Sheldon Axel had left enough information behind to fill a library. She had some of the best scientists on the planet trying to finish what he started. She was no engineer, but she had set out to change the future. The board was hesitant, but she was founder and CEO, and she had built the firm from the ground up. She had enough clout to force things her way. They dumped nearly $1 billion into Sheldon Axel's brilliant discoveries, and he was on the verge of perfecting his oil extraction technology. That all stopped when he was murdered. Publicly, Sheldon was killed in a fire, but she knew that he had been murdered. The medical examiner's confidential report concluded that the cause of death was forced asphyxiation. He'd been strangled to death, his windpipe crushed. Whoever did that had been strong. The police wanted to keep it out of the press. They were conducting their own investigation, but Rose knew they wouldn't turn anything up. This was corporate espionage and corruption. There were no tracks. This was a deliberate and thought-out attack that couldn't be traced. The best revenge would be finishing the work, completing what they so desperately tried to stop. Rose picked up the mason jar and peered into the inner workings of the filter. It looked like the insides of a clock with intricate gears crisscrossed like Los Angeles freeway systems. Her heart stopped. In the reflection of the glass, a large figure moved in the room behind her. Her cell phone was on the table across the room. The figure inched closer. As calmly as she could, she set the jar down and grabbed the dumbbell she used once and forgotten about from under the table. She felt big hands closing in on her. She turned and swung the dumbbell. The hulking man swatted it aside with an open hand like it was made of paper. Rose screamed. The man's nose was broken. There was no bone or blood beneath the skin but silver metal. Rose got to her feet and sprinted towards her phone. The monster was upon her, gripping her ankle. She flung backwards onto the floor. Blood pooled in her mouth. Her assailant lumbered forward. This is what had killed Sheldon Axel, and it was going to kill her too. Its mechanical strength was immense. The metal fingers bit into her neck as it lifted her up off the ground. The thing had no breath, but it gave off an electric heat. Her feet dangled above the floor as she fought to stay conscious. She kicked it in the groin, and pain exploded up her shins. A gunshot fired off, and the machine dropped her. When she hit the ground, a flash of white stars seared her vision. She blinked them away. There was a man standing in her doorway. He was dressed in a white suit and looked like he'd been peeled right out of the 1800s. 2 pistols filled his hands. One of them was smoking. This time, the girl laying behind the monstrous machine wasn't Jennifer playing the part of damsel in distress. It was Rose, in her bent-up tricycle and her mangled doll. The machine turned to face Oliver. He saw the broken nose and metal shimmering beneath. It was the same death machine he'd faced in a dark alley on a rainy New York night. This time, Oliver knew who he was fighting and was carrying 2 loaded pistols. There were now 4 shots left in the Colt. He still had 1 in the flintlock. If the Colt didn't bring this thing down, the flintlock would be like shooting a charging rhino with a slingshot. Oliver cocked the Colt Python and unloaded another bullet into the machine's forehead. It bounced off as if it were nothing but an annoying fly. The robot stepped forward. Oliver unloaded the Colt's remaining 3 shots, this time heeding the gamekeeper's advice and aiming for the chest. He may as well have shot him with snowballs. The bullets bounced away harmlessly. The robot snatched his arm and squeezed. Oliver dropped both his weapons. The robot dug a metallic thumb into his gunshot wound. He screamed as the pain seared up and down his body. He squirmed to get free, and the robot headbutted him. It felt as if his brain had been knocked loose and his vision lit up with stars. I'm sorry, Rose, Oliver thought. All those years ago, I nearly killed you, and now I've brought death back to your door. Forgive me. The robot dropped him. When Oliver hit the floor, his eyes snapped open. The robot was whirring back and forth, spinning around the room with arms flailing. It let out a hideous screech as the machinery inside its metal skeleton shut down. It fell dead on the floor in front of Oliver. Stuck to its back was a big jar full of oil. The gears inside the jar hissed, sucking the inky black liquid out of the killing machine. The gears inside the jar came to a stop. The killing machine was still, having been sucked dry by the device sticking out of its back. The robot lifted its head one last time, and then went limp. Rose was standing over it. I didn't think that would work, she said. Oliver got to his feet and picked up the flintlock pistol. A thin line of blood fell from the corner of Rose's lip. Her lip was already turning purple, and it would swell to the size of a melon by the morning. Her red hair stuck up every which way, but her eyes were unshaken. The white hook scar above her eye seemed to wink at Oliver. Do I know you? She asked. The complete pain that Oliver's body was in washed over him like water. Everything hurt, and he was speechless. He thought to himself, what do you say to the little girl you almost killed, who grew up to be the woman you saved from peril that you created? I'll explain later, Oliver said. We need to get out of here right now. Rose snapped at him. I'm not going anywhere with you. I don't even know who you are. Oliver grabbed her by the arm. I might look like hell, but I'm the best chance you have at survival right now. They killed Sheldon, they tried to kill you, and they won't stop. We have to go. She hesitated a moment and then nodded with nervous eyes. Do you have a car? Yes, in the garage. I need to grab my keys. Rose slipped into the other room. Oliver found an antique chair by the front door and collapsed. Blood pooled on the ground beneath his feet. The bullet hole in his arm was now waterfalling, the stitches ripped open. He closed his eyes. Just for a second, he thought to himself. I just need a second. Oliver was certain Andrew was behind the attack. That robot was his. But that didn't make any sense. Andrew promised to protect Rose and remove her from whatever game he was playing in the oil market without violence. He explained to Oliver that the controllers would kill Rose. So why was Andrew's robot doing the dirty work, even though he lost the duel? The answer would have to wait. Right now, they had to run. He wasn't sure where, but he'd feel better once they were in a car and on the move. As he breathed, he felt a tremendous weight float off his body. He had saved her. He'd come full circle and his guilt was rising, misting out of his mind as if years of pressure were being let go. My debts have been paid, he thought to himself. Andrew was right about one thing. I did find redemption in becoming a duelist. You shouldn't have let her out of your sight. That cool voice, that calm tone that could tame a hurricane. Andrew Dickens was standing before him. He was holding a dueling pistol to Rose's temple. Andrew, what are you doing? Oliver shivered. He felt cold. His body had been pushed beyond the brink of exhaustion. Every moment was agony. Please don't kill me, Rose pleaded. I have money, I can pay you. Hush now, Andrew said. This is the final chapter, the crescendo when the villain reveals himself to the damaged hero, and I can't have you spoiling my surprise ending. The muscles in Oliver's arms had turned to lead. The flintlock pistol slipped inside his blood-soaked palm. He tightened his grip, not daring to drop his only weapon. I lost the duel, Oliver said. Andrew nodded. When we last met, I told you to make up your mind if you could trust me. It seems our relationship isn't what it once was, or you wouldn't have lost that duel on purpose and raced halfway across the world to rescue this one. Why'd you lose? Because I knew you were lying. I knew that if I won the duel, you'd kill her. But I lost. Was I wrong? No, you're right. If you would have won the duel, I would have killed her. If you would have lost, the controllers would have taken her off the table peacefully. But I did lose, so why are you here? Why is this happening? The gamekeeper stepped through the doorway. He was wearing a clean suit and his usual white gloves. He walked to the center and folded his hands. Because you broke the rules. No duelist has ever lost a duel on purpose, Andrew said. We don't tell the duelists what they're fighting for so they can't manipulate the game. I gave you a few breadcrumbs as to what I was trying to do, hoping it would motivate you, and you ran with it, throwing a little monkey wrench into the honorable way we settle things. The duel you fought in Transylvania crossed the line. The victory was deemed null and void because the controllers know you didn't try. And contrary to what you might think about me, I have quite the temper, and I hate losing. Thanks to your victories, I've become the wealthiest man in the world, and we haven't lost a duel in 2 years. So you can imagine the sting when I got the call from the gamekeeper that you lost. Moments later, I was told you fled the scene with a loaded weapon, having threatened the gamekeeper, and I knew you lost on purpose. Well, to put it lightly, my blood boiled. And like you, I also did something reckless. I defied the laws of dueling and tried to kill Rose without a valid dueling victory. Now, the controllers are punishing me. How? Oliver asked. The gamekeeper answered for him. The matter of how to remove Rose from the equation still remains unsettled. As Mr. Dickens explained, the duel you fought has been thrown out. A proper duel where both duelists are honestly trying to win needs to be conducted. If you win, Oliver, Rose gets to live, and the controllers will deal with her peacefully, and if you lose, she dies right here and now. The flintlock pistol slipped from Oliver's bloodied hand and clinged to the floor. He tried to stand, but his head was swimming. He wiped his hand against his pant leg and picked up the pistol. How is this prick getting punished? You have to pay a fine? The punishment fits the crime, Andrew said. The controllers sympathize with me, for none of them would appreciate their duelist betraying them. So I still have a chance to get my way and see Rose killed tonight. But as punishment, I have to fight the duel myself. Andrew grabbed Rose by the arm and walked her over to the gamekeeper. He pushed her down on her knees. Best of luck, Oliver. I'm an excellent shot. The gamekeeper cocked the hammer back on his pistol and pointed it at Rose's head. Oliver stood up. Blood rushed to his head and he gripped the chair back to steady his balance. He blinked his stars out of his vision and made his way over to the gamekeeper. Your pistol, please. The gamekeeper took Oliver's gun, examined it, and gave it back. He did the same with Andrew's. You both know the rules. On my mark, you each walk 20 paces and stop. When I give the signal, you may turn and fire. Seeing as I'm pointing my weapon at this girl's head, I won't be firing my weapon as is customary of these duels. I'll simply yell out mark. Is that understood? Both men nodded. Very well then. Oliver looked down at Rose. She was sobbing and her eyes were squeezed shut. He could only imagine the confusion whirling in her head. Then he stared into Andrew's dead eyes. They were unblinking. Oliver planned to put a bullet right between them. Winning wouldn't be enough. He had to put this guy down. Mark. The two men turned and paced. With each step, Oliver felt more blood flow down his shooting hand. It was seeping between his palm and the sandalwood grip. The bullet hole was in the shoulder of his gun hand. He thought about using his left, but he was slow with his left. The gunshot wound would slow him down, but right here, right now, he had to be faster than he'd ever been before. Every duelist has an expiration date, a predetermined number of fights before he gets shot up or retires. No one knows how many fights a duelist has in him until he reaches the end of the road and drops dead or calls it quits. For some duelists, it's one fight, while for others, it's hundreds. Mark. Oliver spun, and with the snap of his wrist, he fired the flintlock pistol. The barrel whipped around to the left, and the blowback threw Oliver's weakened body to the ground. The round bullet curved and found its mark. Andrew's head snapped back. But he didn't fall. His head creaked upright. Smoke twirled up from his forehead. The skin had been broken open, and underneath there was metal. Chapter 23. Ascension. What the hell? Oliver thought to himself. He was laying in a pool of his own blood. The white suit was splashed with red. He had no weapons. His body was so mangled that he couldn't run if he tried. Andrew was a robot. Oliver's brain began to whir. How could Andrew not have been real? Had Oliver been serving a machine this entire time? A rhythm sounded off behind him. A slow, repetitive clink against the tiled floor as if someone was applauding him. An old man was standing in the doorway. He was holding a cane and bringing it up and down, banging its pointed tip on the ground. Well done, Oliver, the man said. Jennifer appeared behind the man. He hooked his arm around hers, and she walked him over to a chair in the middle of the room. When he sat, he heaved a heavy sigh and let out a violent cough. Jennifer handed him a handkerchief, and he wiped specks of blood from his lips. What's going on? Oliver demanded. He looked to the gamekeeper. I won. Let the girl go. The gamekeeper turned to the old man, and the old man nodded. The gamekeeper reached into his back pocket and pulled out a cloth doused in chloroform. His dark hand pressed it against Rose's lips, and she passed out. Don't worry, said the old man. She's just asleep. Can't have her intruding on our little conversation. Who are you? The old man's wrinkles were deep, and his jowls bounced as he spoke. His shoulders were hunched, and he looked as if a strong gust of wind would snap him in two. But there was something familiar about him. You don't recognize your old friend? It dawned on Oliver, and his eyes went wide. Andrew? The one and only. He wheezed, and another flurry of coughs took over. Jennifer rubbed his back until they passed and wiped his mouth. Talking is difficult for me, so please don't interrupt until I'm done. I assure you when I finish, you'll have all the answers. I've been testing you since the beginning. I led you to believe that the test was over, and you had earned your place at my side as my champion, my knight, my duelist. But I have to admit, I wasn't being entirely honest with you. I wasn't just looking for a duelist. I was looking for an heir. I never married and I bore no children. I don't have much time left, as you can see, and my work to bring balance to the world is not complete. It must go on. You have passed the final test, and I'm offering you my seat as a controller. When I'm gone, you'll inherit all of my wealth, all my assets, and take up my mantle to finish what I started. Oliver got up and slid into a chair facing Andrew. His mind wandered back to that fateful night 2 years ago when they sat as friends before a roaring fire. This was all a test. How? Well, when we first met and opened the doors of my world to you, I told you a half-truth. I told you a duel won sparked the U.S. entry into World War II, and a war profiteer became wealthy beyond imagination. I told you that war profiteer died long ago with his duelist and his seat had been taken. He didn't die. In fact, he's very much still alive, as he is me. I was responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. I thought it was the right thing at the time, and I watched in horror as the world tore itself apart fighting. I did my best to end things quickly, and my duelist fought for me again to pull the plug on the war. Upon his victory, I was able to shake the right hands and the bomb fell in Hiroshima. I've had to live with the burden of all those lives lost, and I don't sleep silently anymore. I made a vow to myself to avert World War III at all costs. I continued to play the dueling game and amass more and more wealth and influence over global economics. It became clear to me early on that whoever controlled the oil would control the world, and I needed to control that to keep the peace. I couldn't stop all the violence, but I knew the human race would go on. But as you can see, I'm an old, dying man. I've been using this younger, robotic version of myself for some time now to do my bidding. So I began to search for a suitable replacement to finish the job, and I found you. I knew who you were before I took you in as my duelist. I knew you were a good man, even though you had done terrible things. But I needed to see the choices you'd make under pressure, and you didn't disappoint. In your first duel in Transylvania, you could have killed your opponent. I watched that duel live on a flickering computer screen. You hesitated. I could see the conflict in you, and in the end, you chose a risky shot to win the duel and caused minimal injury. You showed great restraint, and I know you've killed men in your career as a duelist, but you aren't unfeeling. You've never killed for enjoyment or out of cold blood. I admit, most of the duels you won for me were to establish my position in Empire, so I could exert my influence and unfold my plan in the perfect way. But I wasn't being selfish. I was setting things up for you to slide into the driver's seat after I was gone. Sheldon Axel was one of my robots. He was a fiction created by me, a means for me to pull Rose into this and introduce my oil extraction technology into the world indirectly. Archive Investments gets most of its money from me. No one knows that, and Rose is in the dark. But I did funnel the money through various accounts and shadow investors. I guided her to find Sheldon, but I only let her have some of the research. I perfected the technology a few years ago. I just needed her to play her role in this game so I could see who you really were. And who am I really? Oliver asked. You're the man who wouldn't sacrifice the child for the world. You're the man who won't kill unless he must. You're the man who has redeemed himself. And now, I need you to finish what I started. Rose will wake up in her bed tomorrow morning. We will be gone. There will be an email on her desktop with the rest of the formula for the oil extraction technology. She'll be able to release it to the world. You'll take my seat as a controller, and using the infrastructure and plans I've laid throughout the globe as a result of your victories, you can ensure Rose succeeds. You can be her guardian angel from the shadows, and use your position to bring about a better world, a world that I unfortunately won't live long enough to see. Andrew placed his cane on the ground and rose. He extended his hand. Time to complete the story, become the phoenix, rise from the ashes and take my place. Oliver stood, blood-soaked, hurt but baptized in the fire of battle, and reborn. He took Andrew's hand and sealed the deal. Chapter 24. Happy Ending. Dorothy Green squeezed a lemon into her iced tea. The sun was setting. She closed her paperback and set it down. The spine of the old book was falling apart. She'd read the mystery so many times before. The ending was grim and bloody, and she'd much rather watch the sun fall beneath the horizon in glorious reds and oranges and yellows. Her phone rang. Hey, Mom. It's Oliver. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her boy told her a story about oil and new inventions she didn't understand, but none of that mattered. He was safe. He told her that everything would be alright now, and he'd be over soon for dinner. This time, he kept his promise. "You're fired." The lady was angry. She waved her finger back and forth like a maestro. Roland didn't care. He hated his job anyways. A guy could only work at Pizza Hut in his 30s and maintain some semblance of pride for so long. He tossed the red visor aside and stepped out onto the sidewalk. He found a bench near Central Park and watched the birds. An old man was feeding them, and they swirled into the air in a flurry of feathers. Seat taken? A blond man in a blue suit was standing over him. Roland shrugged. "Looks empty, doesn't it?" The man sat down. "You served?" "How do you know that?" Roland asked. "The tattoo in your arm. Guys get those in the Navy." Roland nodded. "Yeah, I served. Did you?" "In a way," the man smiled. "I came here to tell you that what happened on that ship wasn't your fault, and I want to offer you a job because I think your talents go much further than making pizzas." "Who are you?" Roland asked. The man extended his hand. "My name is Oliver Green, and I'm looking for a duelist."
Thank you so much for listening to the whole thing. You made it to the end of The Duelist. I had a lot of fun writing it. I hope you had just as much fun listening to it. If you like my work, make sure you like and subscribe, and go over to my website, www.andywritesstories.com, to check out more of my work, and I'll see you in the next video.